In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a Deadpool type text effect in Photopea. Hi there and welcome to the video. So we'll start off by creating a new project. And I'm going to choose my old favourite, which is the FB event image preset here. That just gives us a 1080p blank canvas. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to download a custom font from the internet and then install it into Photopea. Now I'm going to give you a link to the location of the custom font. It's absolutely free, and also I'll link you in the description box to a previous tutorial I've made on exactly how to import and set up custom fonts in Photopea. So I'm not going to do that in much detail now, but I will just quickly give you a reminder of the process. So you'd save the font file onto your desktop or somewhere on your local computer. Then when you go into the type section here, which as you can see has got an uppercase and lowercase t as an icon. And if you don't see this, by the way, go up to the window menu at the top and it will be there as character. Click on that and this will appear in your toolbar here. So all you would do is go to the top left hand side corner of this dialog box where it says the name of the font. It will bring up the font list and then you simply click load font, locate those font files on your computer, click on them and click OK, and then they'll be loaded into Photopea, as you can see here as part of this list. So the font we're using here is called Rogue Hero. So I'll just do a search for Rogue Hero, and as you can see, it's brought two results. And that's because when I downloaded the font file, it gave me various options of all different styles and weights of this font. But I found the one that's the most accurate to the Deadpool text is this one called Rogue Hero Condensed. So I'm going to select that. Now, size-wise, just so I'm not messing around on the canvas resizing it after I enter it, I'm going to just put in the size that I know I did when I was practicing this tutorial. So it'll be about the right size straight away. And that was about 320 pixels. That's what I've noted down. And for the color, I'm setting all this up before we actually type the text, just so we don't have to mess around doing it afterwards. And for the starting color, I entered these RGB values, or at least this is what I used previously, and it worked for me. So it was RGB, so 160 red, 20 green, and 70 blue, which is a little bit of a cooler red colour. But bearing in mind, this will change later when we put more filters on it, so it's not really important at this stage. We can adjust this wherever we like. Now we'll just make sure we're on our text tool here. You can access that by pressing T as a shortcut. Click down onto the screen and we're going to type Deadpool. However, you need to follow a certain mixture of upper and lowercase to actually get this to be visible. So it is uppercase D, lowercase e and a, uppercase D, uppercase P, O, O and L. Now, they're not appearing upper and lowercase on the screen. They do look slightly different depending on if you do an upper or a lowercase version of those characters. So to get it matching the logo, follow that combination. I'll pop that up on the screen as a little note, so you can just check back on that if you forget exactly what that was. Okay, so now we've got our text, our basic Deadpool text, and now it's time to start putting some effects on it. So the first thing, or the first effect I'm going to apply, is we're going to double click next to the word Deadpool in the layer stack here, which will bring up our layer style dialog here. And in this first stage, what I'm really doing is I just want to add a dark bevel around the edges of the text and also a little bit of a gradient, and I'll show you that now. So we'll click on Bevel and Emboss, and I'm going to start from the top down and just show you what settings I used. So it's going to be leave it as in a bevel. We're going to change the technique here to chisel soft, and the depth I'm going to set it at, let me type it in for accuracy, 260. The size, I did it as 6. And the angle, and this is important here, uncheck the use global angle option, because we'll be using a couple of bevels in this job, but we don't all necessarily want them to be exactly the same angle, and I'll show you why later. So uncheck that, and we're going to change the angle to 30 at the top, and then underneath we'll change this number to 80. which is actually the distance. It says degrees here, but the top one is the angle, and the bottom one is like a distance value. And the reason why we're doing this is to create a singular dark bevel. We don't want any highlight on this layer, which is why I'm going to go down one more, and I'm going to reduce the bevel highlight here, which is this slider, down to 0. I'm going to completely get rid of it. And then I'm going to just drag the shadow slider, which is underneath, all the way to the top. So now we've got a dark bevel around the edges of all the characters. And the next step, we're going to go to gradient overlay. And straight away, I'm going to make that blend mode hard light and drop the opacity to 20. Again, all these settings are just the ones that I experimented with previously, but you can tweak these if you want to take things a little bit more extreme looking, or you want to take it in a different direction. But this is just how I got to the look that I was going for. So we've knocked that back to 20%, and as you can see, that's just giving it a really gentle gradient, so it's darker at the bottom going into light at the top. And again, that's just reflective of the properties of the logo that we are looking at. So that's those two effects. Now let me just get rid of this screen for a second. What we need to do now, and this is an important step, is we need to put that text layer into a group folder. So click on it to highlight it, and press Control or Command G, depending on if you're on a PC or a Mac, to create a group folder. And I'll just call this like main text. And the reason why we're doing this is we're going to be putting more effects, but on the folder itself. And that's important because it will react differently if you put more effects on the folder than the text itself. So it's just quite important in this case, but easy to follow along. So stick with me here. So we put it into a folder. Now we've got a couple of images that we're going to use, like texture images in this job, and I've linked them all in the description box, free downloads as per usual, so you can grab them and follow along. But this one we're going to use here is a kind of a grungy texture, like a grungy metal. So just drag that in from your desktop into the image, and it'll come in as a smart object, which is great because that means we can manipulate it and it won't lose quality. Now the first thing I'm going to do before I even start manipulating this metal texture, I'm going to double click on the layer icon of that texture to enter the smart object, which is this. So what we're doing now is we're making a couple of adjustments, one of which is hue saturation. So go down to your adjustment layer and your adjustment layers options and add hue saturation and desaturate it to take the color out. Now I'm doing these edits within the smart object, so when we're in our main sort of file, it's a lot neater and you don't have unnecessary layered up effects stacking on top of things. If you've got a smart object, you can do them within the smart object itself and it keeps it neat. Now I just want to brighten up some of the midtones in this texture so it's not quite as dirty looking. So for that, I'll just add a simple layers adjustment layer, grab the midtone slider here and just drag it slightly to the left. And you'll see it's keeping the very darker bits, it's keeping the very lighter bits, but it's just nudging the whole thing a little bit away from the shadow area. So I think that's fine. So now Control or Command S to save, and it will save and it'll come with a pop-up in a minute. There you go, Smart Object Updated. Now you can close that, and as you can see, now those effects have been applied within that smart object. You could have done them and clipped them to this, but this just keeps it neat. Now I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate this texture. Let me just get rid of that for a sec. I'm just going to enlarge it to cover the text basically. Let's just do something like that. It doesn't need to fill the whole screen, but it definitely needs to cover where the text is. And then what we need to do now is we need to grab that text or that texture, drag it to the top. I'm going to rename it texture. And now hold Alt and click on the texture layer icon, and you'll see it will clip to this folder. So you can see that little down arrow on the left next to the texture now, and that's just Alt and clicking on the layer. So if it can undo it and do it again, and that means that that texture is now going to purely apply to everything within that folder. So as you can see, it's only affecting the actual Deadpool text now. Now on that texture file, while it's still selected, we're going to change the blend mode. I'm going to change it to color burn. I'm going to leave it 100% opacity. So now you can see what it's done. It's applied the texture on top of everything, including the beveled edge that we created on the text itself. So now we've got a good basis with a bit of a grimy texture on, which is a good starting point for the rest. So now we've done that, we need to add some layer style effects onto the folder itself. So not on the text, straight into the folder. So again, go to the empty space next to the folder's name and double click to bring up the layer style dialog. Now, earlier on we created a dark bevel around the edge. Now we're actually going to create the highlight. And the reason why I'm doing this separately is to have a little bit more control. So if I now go up, start from the top, go to bevel emboss again, start from the top, and I'll talk you through what we need to do here. So leave it on in a bevel. Actually, you can leave this, change this to smooth. So the technique changed to smooth this time. And we're going to go depth. I'm just going to drag this all the way to the end because for this particular setup here, like the higher it goes, it just makes the highlight look a bit sharper. So we want the depth like maxed out or very high. And the exact amount doesn't matter. But this goes up to 1000, so that's what we're going to do. Okay, and as for the size, I did this as 7, so just slightly bigger than the other. Soften, we left it at 0. And now down to the angle, and again, make sure that this use global angle is unchecked. You don't want this checked. And now we're going to change this to 130 and then 50. And then we go down to the bevel, highlight and shadow amount down here. And we're basically going to, we're going to flip this from what it was. So we're going to get rid of the shadow because we've already got the shadow of the bevel in the other effect. And now we're going to drag the highlight up. And as you can see, it's I'm going to drag it right to the top, so literally reverse them. And as you can see now, it's added this really sharp, nice little highlight, like directional highlight on that bevel. If I'd have tried to do that in the original stage, it wouldn't have. I wouldn't have been able to get this exact look, which again was trying to copy the Deadpool logo in terms of how the highlight and things like that interacted. Okay, so now we can click OK to get out of that. We've got our basic logo here with a dark bevel and a nice little highlight. So we now need to duplicate that texture layer. So with this selected, I'm going to press Control or Command J, again depending on if you're on a PC or a Mac, to make a duplicate. And then I'm going to drag this down and make sure it's clipped actually to the text. So not the folder this time, to the text layer down below. So you can see here, it's clipped to the text layer. If it hasn't clipped and it just looks like that, then do the same as earlier, Alt click on that layer and then it will be clipped to the layer below. So what we're going to use this for is we're going to actually use this as the original almost metal texture that we're going to wear through and create little bits of spots of rust and wear and tear and things like that and a nice grungy look. So we need to take the blending mode off now on this particular layer, put it back to normal and at 100%. So this in effect is what we're going to be brushing through to as like a texture underneath the paint. So we need to add a layer mask onto this. So with that layer selected, I'm going to change the mode to just metal. I'm going to change the mode, sorry, change the name because it might get confusing otherwise. Click on the layer mask icon and just press Control or Command I on the layer mask itself to invert it. So now it's hidden. So it looks the same as before, but now we've got that metal texture that we can show through selectively where we want by brushing. And I'm going to show you a little trick. Well, it's not really a trick, but it's more like just the fact that you don't have to use the standard round brush. Even if you don't create a custom brush, Photopea comes loaded as default with a small selection of other brushes. So you've got your brushes up here, your normal brushes. And the one we want to use for this is on the end here, and it's if you hover your mouse over, it's called Round Noisy Marker, and it's this one here. So if I click on this, and all that's going to do is it's going to give the brush a little bit of irregularity compared to a normal soft brush, because it's got some more interesting edges. The only thing is it's quite difficult to actually see. It doesn't really give you the brush shape, so you may have to click down a couple of times to see exactly what you're looking at. So press B for your brush tool, if it's not already on it at this point, and make sure your foreground color is white. So the idea here is we're going to brush the layer mask away in certain areas, change your brush size, and see how I'm brushing now. Let me zoom in on this so we can clearly see what we're doing. So now we're just going to brush away some little bits. Don't go too far on this, and you can drop the opacity of your brush if you want more of a subtle look. Well, I'm not going to make you watch me do all this because it will be super boring, so I'm just going to skip to me finishing it, and I'll see you in a second. Okay, welcome back. So as you can see here, I've just added some of that paint distressed effect across the whole logo, and there are a couple of things we need to do now to enhance this look. I mean, it looks okay, but we could definitely enhance it, and I've got a couple of little tricks to show you. So the first one is, if we make sure that the layer mask itself is selected, we're going to use a filter to actually give this look a little bit more grit and a little bit more realism. So with the layer mask selected, not the layer itself, it has to be the mask, go to the filter menu, I'm going to go to filter gallery. And what we're looking for here is one called spatter. So if you look down, it's under the brush stroke section, and you can see here spatter. Now, unfortunately, the preview screen here isn't really any good at showing you what it's doing, but I found that if you just click on spatter, leave the values completely as default and click OK. Now what you'll see, or hopefully you'll see, is those areas of distressed paint have now just got a little bit more detail to them. Let me undo that. So I'm going to undo back to what it was before. So that's what it looked like after we did our brush work. And that's what it looked like when we applied the spatter filter. Now you can see what it's done. It really looks like chipped and flaked paint now, which is really handy to sort of dirty up some things. Now we're going to do one more thing to this before we leave onto the next stage, and that is go to the layer style of that metal layer. So double click at the side, and we're going to give this a really, really small subtle shadow, and it's going to help just tie things together. So I'm going to go to inner shadow, and the settings for this are, you can just choose normal for the blend mode, just black for the color. And then we're going to reduce some of these values down quite a lot. So the opacity, I'm going to take it down to about, I think I did 30. I'm just going to do 35. And noise, you can add a tiny bit of noise if you like. It just adds a little bit of extra grunge in there. Not too much though, because it just kind of spoils it if you go too high on the noise. And then spread 1 and size 1. We're keeping it very subtle here, and the range, and you can just leave as it is. So if I press OK now, and if we just drop down these layer style effects for the inner glow and we turn that on and off, you can see it's almost just given a little bit more of a definition to the edge of that chipped paint, and it's just enhanced the look a little bit more. So we've got our main logo now, but it just looks a bit boring on its own in this environment, so we're going to give it a nice background. So I'll zoom out for the moment, and again, this file is going to be in the description box as normal for you to download and use yourself. And I'm just going to bring it in, drag it into the scene, and then I'll immediately need to drag it below all of our other elements. So it's this grungy black dirty background, which I just really like. Again, this particular bit has got nothing to do with Deadpool, but now we've got the logo kind of set up, I just want to make a nice suitable background that you can use for other things. So I'm just going to drag this up so those really black grungy bits of the background are not too much in the shot. I'll leave that down. Now click on the layer, press Command or Control G. Again, depending on if you're a Mac or a PC person. I'll just call this BG for background. As you've noticed in there, I quite like to keep layers and things as organised as possible because it's super good work in practice to do so, and it just helps to go back in and edit things quickly. So above that background layer, I'm going to add an adjustment layer, which is going to be a curves. And I just want to just grab somewhere in the middle, so I just want to darken this background down a little bit from the mid-tone area. So just something like that. Again, this is to taste, completely to taste. And I quite like a bit of a drop shadow on this text now. So I'm going to go back to the original text layer here, double click to go into the layer styles again. Now, the reason why we didn't do this at the start of the job when we originally went and did the layer styles for this effect is because I didn't know how the background would interact with it then. So it's always good to do things like shadows once you've got all your backgrounds in place. And I've made a mistake here, but it's an important mistake in the fact that it's a good example of to show you why and where you should put effects. So I've added a drop shadow onto the text layer itself, which is in a group, and the group has got a bevel effect. So as you can see here, what it's actually done is it's tried to apply a drop shadow, but then because the effects in the group override the effects on anything in the group, it's actually turned that drop shadow into a bevel, which might be an interesting effect for something else, but it's not what we want here. So I'm going to come out of that, actually going to do the drop shadow on the folder that the text is in. And now you can see it's done the drop shadow correctly. And that's actually a really important lesson to learn, is the sort of hierarchy of effects when things are in folders, depending on whether you put the effect on the folder itself or the actual contents of the folder will give you different results. So I'm not going to spend much time on this shadow. It's just to create a little bit of a background separation. Something like that's absolutely fine. Okay. And now what I quite like to do here is if you press B for your brush tool, you should hopefully still have that other brush selected that we used earlier, the one that's not quite a round soft brush, a little bit more interest. And I'll create a new layer by clicking on the new layer icon down here. Oh, didn't mean to create two. And I'll pick a nice bright red colour from this logo. And here's a hint: when you're on the brush tool, if you hold down the Alt key, you'll see the cursor change like that. And then if you click down, it'll act as a temporary eyedropper. And as you can see, it's just pick that colour. And then you let go of the Alt key and you're back into the brush where you can just brush away with that colour. Just a little time-saving hint for you there. So I'm going to change this blend mode to colour dodge. And with that red selected, all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start painting. And this is just something that I thought looked quite good. Just paint a bit of this red. It's not even a glow. It's more like a spray paint, like an overspray or something like that. I just thought it looked quite cool, tying in another element of the colour into the background. And because we've used that different brush and it's not just your generic brush, it gives quite a nice rough effect, which again, this is a really good brush that you get free with Photopea if you just want things to look a bit less uniform, something like that. And if that's not strong enough for you, that effect, then the easiest way to deal with that is just to literally click the layer, press Ctrl or Command J to duplicate it, and then it'll go super bright. And now you can take the top layer that you've duplicated and we can just knock the opacity back. And this is a really nice and quick way to just get a good balance between a subtle amount and then something that's quite bright and vibrant. So I'm going to leave that here. Now, although this is looking good, I just kind of think it needs more of a pop. So on top of everything here, this is an optional stage, of course, I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. I'm going to create a levels adjustment layer. So this sits right on top of everything. And here, I'm just going to take the highlight point and I'm going to click and I'm going to start dragging it left. And that is now pushing more value into the highlights. So in other words, it's just making the highlights appear brighter. Now, if you go too far, it's going to start looking totally sort of blown out and the colors are going strange. But you can definitely take it and just use your sort of your eyes and you can see when it's going too far. And we can try the same for some shadows as well. If we click the shadow area and drag that right, it's going to increase the depth of the darker areas in the image. But the only thing to note here is because the background we've used has got these quite grungy, solid black bits in the corners, it's going to very quickly increase those and make them encroach into the image, which you might like. But I'm just going to do that a little bit. Now if I turn that on and off, you can really see how it's just made the whole thing really pop now. And the absolute beauty of doing this, how I've showed you, is it's all live text. And I really try to do this on my text effect tutorials whenever possible. And this means you're working in a way so that after all these effects are done, you can go back, you can edit the text to whatever you want. And it will still retain all of the effects we've put on it, which is really great. And you can change the font and you can do whatever you want with it. And once you've set it up, save it as a PSD and you can change it and tweak it to your heart's content.